I never did anything to harm my daughter or my granddaughter.
The test is about to begin. Please remain still.
Oh, man.
Casey Anthony's Parents, the lie detector test. Watch now, only on A&E. And watch next day on the A&E app.
The friendship is sharing deal.
Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac, and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.
You can support this podcast at patreon.com/partnersincrimemedia.
Meet Namely, the all-in-one HR, payroll, and benefits software employees love to use. Clock in, schedule vacation, and more from your desk or on the go. Plus, use the social feed to share company news and give shout-outs for a job well done. Over 1,000 companies use Namely every day. Get a free demo by visiting namely.com/crime. That's namely.com/crime. Build a better workplace with Namely.
If solving mysteries is your cup of tea, take a stab at Dispatch, an interactive serial story that's delivered directly to your door. The story has been testing our detective skills with a new set of clues each month, clippings, mysterious objects, and hidden websites, all leading through a mind-bending ride. Each tale unfolds over several deliveries with helpful clues in every box to uncover the truth. And just for Crime Writers On listeners, you can save 50% on your first box by going to breakoutdispatch.com/writers and using the code WRITERS at checkout.
I'm Rebecca Lavoie, and this is Crime Writers On, the podcast about other podcasts and also about true crime, pop culture, journalism. And this week we will look at the latest legal victory for serials, Adnan Syed. Another court affirms the decision to give him a new trial, but is he any closer to freedom? Then we'll look at the binge-worthy podcast, maybe, Empire on Blood. A journalist introduces us to the scariest drug dealer in the Bronx, who just may be in prison for a murder he didn't commit. Joining me to dive into all that is my true crime co-author and real-life husband, Kevin Flynn. Good evening, Kevin.
I'm feeling the love, Rebecca.
You are?
I am. People love me. I'm good enough. I'm smart enough, whatever the hell that means. Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second. All right, also with us is journalist, true crime author, licensed private investigator, former defense investigator, and certified cat lady, Laura Bricker. Hello, Laura.
Hello. Yes, my cats have the fever right now, the spring fever. So, yeah.
Cat scratch fever?
Yeah. Well, literally, they like sit at the door now because we started letting them out a little bit because they were strays when we got them. And so they'd gotten the fever then, and they scratch like they're digging a hole through the glass.
She's got the fever, and the only thing that can cure it is more cowbell.
More cowbell.
Yes, or more cats.
And finally, no more cats. Finally, with us, the acclaimed novelist behind the City trilogy and the Crime Writers On book club dungeon master, Toby Ball. Hello, Toby.
Dungeon master?
Yes.
Where did that come from?
Didn't you play Dungeons and Dragons in high school, Toby, like Kevin did?
No.
What?
The dungeon master was in charge of making everything happen.
That's right.
Yeah, well, I know what the dungeon master does, but I didn't play. When I was a senior in college, we were in this quad, and then there was like this tiny little courtyard. Then on the other side was this like lounge, and they had like Dungeons and Dragons club at like 8:00 on Saturday mornings.
Yep.
So I would wake up after a long night of having fun to like people like, I've got a 8th level orc on my tail. It's just like, shut up. I'm trying to sleep.
I have a son right now who's really into Dungeons and Dragons, and it's weirder than I thought it was, but also better than I thought it was. I'm still trying to figure it out. But what we're talking about is the fact that for our Patreon supporters, those supporting us at the $5 level or beyond, we have launched a brand new podcast. The first episode is available. It is Toby's Toby Time book club.
What's the real name?
It doesn't have a name, but I'm calling it Toby's Toby Time Book Club.
I liked Balls Deep myself.
I like
Balls
Toby's
Deep.
Toby Time Book Club.
I like Toby's Toby Time Book Club.
Toby, you get to pick. What's the name?
No, I think Toby's Book Club
Balderdash.
is...
Balderdash.
Why can't it just be Toby's Book Club? If it was at your house, we would just call it Toby's Book Club.
Toby's Toby Time, because that kind of has like a fun little ring to it, and it's fun to say.
It is. But this week's book club is great. It features me and Rabia Chaudhry, host of Undisclosed and champion of Adnan Syed, and Patrick Hine from the True Crime Obsessed podcast. And we talk about I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. And I got to say, I was in the book club and talked about this book. And then I also listened to the book club podcast. It's a really good book club podcast. Like, it's good.
Makes you want to read the book or makes you want to
I read the book already.
Yeah.
That's why I was
know
able to
you
be in
did.
but the book club podcast.
Laura and I are on the outside. We don't care.
It's okay, Kevin. We can have our own club. We can have our own Dungeons and Dragons club,
And you
Kevin.
can-
And you can have a podcast for that.
And you can
Ooh.
upload it to Patreon if you want. You can. That is a channel that is available to you.
Nobody wants to pay for that.
I don't know. I tried to play a similar game last weekend for the first time, and it like made my head explode. It was like Treasure Island or Treasure Hunt. I was like, what is happening here?
Yeah.
I don't know if I could figure out Dungeons and Dragons.
So Toby, can you just tell our listeners real quick pitch? How do they get to listen to this book club podcast?
To listen to this book club podcast, you go to our Patreon site, and if you pledge $5 a month or more, you'll get a little email which gives you instructions about where to sign up, and then you can add sort of all the extra stuff to the podcast feed on your podcast app.
Right.
Rebecca's got it all kind of written out nicely
Yes.
that even I could do it.
So it's for our Patreon listeners. I have to say, we hear it at the beginning of every episode, and it's that guy with the voice that just crushes it.
To support this podcast, go to patreon.com/
And he mispronounces
Patreon
Patreon as Patreon.
I like it.
And now we all say it's Patreon.
Yeah.
Toby, I don't know if I should correct you or not.
Kind
It's
of like how I
Patreon,
said
but-
Oregon.
Yeah,
last
exactly.
week
I
and got
guess-
a lot of flack. Oregon. Sorry,
Holy crap.
Oregon.
Holy crap. People
Origami.
from Oregon, if you grew up in Oregon when that wild, wild country stuff with the Rajneeshis was going on, goddamn, do you have a strong opinion and you want to let me know about it?
Kevin, I know you got a lot of flack from Rajneeshi victims.
I didn't get a lot of flack. You got a lot of flack for saying that Sheila is like your spirit animal or something.
I wasn't talking about
Goddamn
Sheila's
terrorist.
I wasn't talking about Sheila's actions actually poisoning the people or whatever. I was talking about the way she comes across on talk shows at that time.
Oh, she's super charming.
She's
but,
legit my spirit
but
animal.
that doesn't make anything.
She would have
yeah.
made a great podcast. That's all I have to say.
Can we talk about email that we got?
Oh, we got one email that we're dying to tell you guys about. And I'm
Yeah.
just going to let Kevin read it right now. Kevin, can you just
Yeah.
read it? And this is about, by the way, our victory in the podcast
Yes,
bracket.
I mean, a lot of people have...
Which I promise, we shouldn't talk about that too much longer. It's like old news.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, so we got a lot of emails from folks back when we were talking about email us with your I voted for you.
Yes.
And I've got one here, subject line, I voted for you. And it's like, hi, crime writers. We voted for you and did even more as we are Toby's parents. And what would CWO be without him? We are faithful fans. Carry on the good work, Faith and Jonathan. And then I got another Faith and Jonathan email. It says, alas, the email went to promotions and we missed it. I'm not quite sure what happened there. Best of luck and super congratulations for winning the bracket, Faith and Jonathan Ball. To which I sent an email back myself saying, Toby who?
Toby, your parents are so nice.
Thanks, Mom and Dad.
There you go.
Oh my God. I feel like I've talked to my parents so much in the last couple of days on podcasts. I'm not going to share my angst again.
No, Toby's parents are 100% normal.
Toby has no angst.
Yeah.
I will give a couple things just before we wrap up our book club conversation. At the very end of this podcast, where I usually put outtakes, what I'm instead going to put is the moment that Rabia Chaudhry came on the line for our book club podcast. And Patrick Hine
So it's a freebie. If you didn't spend $5, you can still hear this.
reacted for a couple of minutes to meeting Rabia Chaudhry.
Oh, that's great. So you're not going to put outtakes of me farting this time?
No, I'm going to put just the book club starting and connecting Rabia Chaudhry, Patrick Hines, Toby, and me. It's a beautiful podcast summit moment.
So anyway, we have this podcast we're going to do tonight.
Here we are. And here's how we're going to kick it off. So, Kevin, can you read this for me?
True Crime Podcast Update!
Well, for the last couple weeks, we've been talking about the Dirty John series coming out on Bravo. And Dirty John himself has been cast. The actor Eric Bana will play Dirty John himself, John Meehan, with Connie Britton, the queen of Nashville / Friday Night Lights, playing, what's the character's name, Kevin?
Stupid Deborah. Not Stupid Deborah.
No, it's just Deborah.
Deborah.
And when we say, anyone who's just joined us who's never listened before, we don't think Deborah is stupid. Kevin once said, please stop criticizing Deborah for being in an abusive relationship. The podcast is not called Stupid Deborah. It's called
Dirty John.
Dirty John. All right. So, Eric Bana as Dirty John. Kevin, thoughts?
Hulk smash. It's a good pick. If you watch Dateline NBC, you finally got to see a photo of the guy.
Yeah.
I think Eric Bana's a good cast.
He's not the worst.
Yeah.
Laura, thoughts?
Well, since I'm not in the loop a lot of the times, I actually looked him up today, and I found his top 7 quotes, and one of them I think really lends itself to him being Dirty John, so I'm going to read it for you. I look my best when I take my helmet off after a long motorcycle ride. I have a glow and a bit of helmet hair.
Just like Toby.
And he also says he races historic muscle cars back in Australia.
Of course he does.
So, I don't know. He sounds like a hunk. He looks like a hunk.
Yeah.
He's pretty hunky.
Toby, thoughts?
I was going to feel bad about saying this until I heard that. But I think he's the guy you call when Hugh Jackman turns you down.
Oh, snap.
Oh, that's so good.
Oh, I don't see Hugh Jackman being Dirty John.
It's
but
so good.
Yeah, it's a good observation.
That ties into his next top quote that I'm going to read you quickly. I fell in love with many women at school who had no idea I existed.
So did I.
And who still have no idea it
existed. Yeah.
All right. Kevin, before we move on to our next thing, can we just say, the last couple weeks before we recorded our podcast episode, you and I have done a very brief Facebook Live video with the Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group, not on a regular Facebook page, with those who have opted into the discussion group. So if you love this podcast, I'm just going to make a pitch again. Join the official Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group, and you will get inappropriate pre-podcast live content that you can watch on video later from the closet in our basement. It's pretty great.
Yeah, it just tells you what's coming up, and you get a little peek behind the scenes.
Maybe hear Kevin swear a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit. This week we talked about Laura's underwear. And more on that to come.
And you got to look into our marital fights about home improvements.
Holy shit.
All right, Kevin, can you read this for me, please?
Another true crime podcast update.
It seems weird to relegate this to the other because this is the big news of the last couple weeks. As you all probably have heard, the 3-judge Court of Special Appeals in Maryland affirmed Judge Welch's lower court ruling granting Adnan Syed, the subject of Serial Season 1, a new trial. But here's how it shakes out. The court reversed the finding on the cell tower evidence, but also reversed the finding on Asia McClain's testimony, which had been a victory for the state in the prior appeal. Either way, it's another legal victory for Adnan Syed, bringing him one step closer to a new trial or perhaps some sort of deal or perhaps some sort of charges being dropped situation. So to get an explanation of this decision and its impact, Kevin talked to our very own legal Siri, Colin Miller. Let's just hear what he had to say.
So in the decision from the Court of Special Appeals, we seem to have a win and a loss for Adnan's team. Could you explain how it shook out?
Yes, sure. So there were 3 judges who took part in this opinion. 2 of the judges, the majority, found that trial counsel, Christina Gutierrez, was ineffective in failing to contact prospective alibi witness Asia McClain. And so that's 2 parts. One, Gutierrez was deficient in failing to contact this witness. There was no strategic reason to fail to do so. And second, if she had contacted this witness and called her at trial, it directly contradicted the state's timeline, and therefore there's a reasonable probability it would have produced a different outcome, in other words, a hung jury or an exoneration. Now, on the other hand, Judge Welch had granted Adnan a new trial on the cell tower issue, finding that Gutierrez was ineffective by failing to use that AT&T disclaimer about incoming calls being unreliable for location status. And on appeal, the Court of Special Appeals found that issue was waived, that this was an issue that they couldn't even hear and therefore didn't reach the merits of Judge Welch's opinion.
Is that waiver because there was a time limit or because of some other procedural reason?
Yeah, what they found was there's this case, Curtis versus State, that Judge Welch had relied upon. And that said, if you have what's known as a fundamental right, including the right to the effective assistance of counsel, you can't waive that unless the waiver is knowing and intelligent. But what the Court of Special Appeals found was that test does not apply if you've already raised the same issue before and are simply claiming a new reason that your right has been violated. And what they found here was, in his first petition, Adnan had claimed ineffective assistance of counsel based on failure to contact the alibi witness, and now he was merely claiming a new reason, the cell tower evidence. And so what they found was this knowing and intelligent waiver standard does not apply, and therefore, by failing to raise this issue in his first petition, he had waived it, and they couldn't consider it.
Well, looking at the decision, it's almost like the mirror decision of Judge Welch's decision. What was successful on the lower court appeal was not successful here, and vice versa.
Exactly. It is an exact mirror image where Judge Welch granted a new trial on this cell tower evidence and denied a new trial on the alibi issue, and now the Court of Special Appeals says it's actually the opposite. He doesn't get a new trial on the cell tower issue. He does get a new trial on the alibi issue.
Okay, so Asia McClain is the big star again. The state had offered 4 reasons why Asia McClain wasn't a problem to them, and none of them scored with the court. Can you quickly break down what the state was arguing and why the court rejected those arguments?
Yeah, I'll focus on the 2 main ones, I guess. The first one was the state said, well, look, at trial, we had this timeline. We said that Adnan had killed Hay at the Best Buy in time to make this 2:36 p.m. call from a payphone at Best Buy to Jay Wiles, and that was the come and get me call. And there was this controversial decision that the state made in appeal, which was to say, yeah, we claim that at trial, but if Asia had testified, we could have shifted that timeline and we could have said all of a sudden that, in fact, this 3:15 call on his call log was the come and get me call. And the Court of Special Appeals says, well, actually, that shows how prejudicial it was for defense counsel not to contact Asia McClain because it shows she directly rebutted her timeline at trial. And then, yeah, some other reasons that the state had claimed were that, well, actually, this places Adnan at the library, which is closer to the exit point from the high school, and therefore it could have put him in a position where he could have abducted Heyman Lee. And again, sort of what the court is saying in response is, yeah, I mean, you can come up with that reason. You can say that you could look at the letters by Asia McClain and say they weren't offered a lie. There are many things that defense counsel could have done, but the bottom line is you can't make those decisions without talking to the alibi witness. And therefore, any sort of reason offered by the state is rebutted by the fact that could have just picked up the phone and called her, and without doing that, you can't really assess how good or bad she'd be as an alibi witness.
Right, it sort of seems like a flaw of basic logic. You can't argue those other things because they didn't happen. They couldn't have happened without this first step, which is interviewing Asia to make any kind of determination.
Right, yeah, exactly. You can't make that threshold decision of whether to call the alibi witness without first talking to them.
Well, we know everybody was really jazzed about the cell tower evidence and the stuff that Susan and you guys had dug up. If Adnan were to get a new trial, does this mean the cell tower information couldn't be introduced?
Yeah, well, there's a legal standard in Maryland. It's called the Fry Standard, and it says that if a technique or technology is not generally accepted in the relevant expert community, that evidence is inadmissible. And of course, the defense is going to say, well, we have the smoking gun. Your own disclaimer that accompanied your cell tower record said incoming pings are not reliable for determining location status. And of course, the state's going to try to claim this is boilerplate or it doesn't really mean what we claim it means in the disclaimer. And of course, Judge Welch, in his opinion, said, no, it is what the defense claims. This does raise questions about the reliability. And so I think there's a good argument if this case goes back to trial, the defense can have these incoming cell tower pings deemed inadmissible.
Now, prosecutors have about a month to decide its next steps. But, there is this shadow of politics over the case at this point because our volunteer prosecutor, Thiru Vignaraja, is running for Baltimore State Attorney. Can you handicap how that might play into a decision that either side might make that isn't usually something that gets considered?
Yeah, I could really see it working both ways, I suppose. So with Thiru running for district attorney, on the one hand, he might think, I need to show that I'm tough on crime and I'm going to see this appeal through and I'm fighting for the victim and her family and I'm not going to drop this. I'm going to fight this tooth and nail until I've had my last appeal. On the other hand, there's an argument that this case constantly being in the press and having media attention and the defense basically winning the last few years shines a poor light on him and his constant appeals. And so you can imagine him deciding on the other hand, look, this is something I just want it to be over and done with. I'm not going to continue to appeal this. I'm going to let this decision stand and, we'll see what happens.
So an important distinction is he is running for the Baltimore City State's Attorney. Is that the one that's handling the appeal or is it a state level organization? Is that the body that is handling all the appeal action?
It is the state attorney general. So it's the statewide agency that is doing this appeal. It is not Baltimore City.
So, I guess an argument would be that the, whatever consideration that the prosecutors at the state level would make, it probably isn't directly tied to what a potential new state's attorney would say, at the city level, because they aren't exactly in the same office, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, another consideration here is that Thiru is doing this on the side. He no longer works for the agency. And so he might have some input in terms of whether this goes forward, but he's not going to have the final say. That'll be the attorney general who would decide whether to perfect this appeal.
Okay, so what's the prospect of bail for Adnan?
Yeah, I would still say it's not great. He obviously filed for bail after Judge Welch had granted him a new trial. And at that point, Judge Welch said, look, this could still go either way, and I'm going to deny bail at this time. At this point, he has a second court, the Court of Special Appeals, saying you're entitled to a new trial, and that strengthens his claim for bail. At the same time, it was a 2-1 decision. We have a dissent in this case, a pretty lengthy dissent. And so I imagine the state would continue to say, look, this is a case that could still be reversed on appeal, and it's too premature to release him.
What's the legal status of someone like Adnan? Because on paper, he hasn't been convicted of a crime, but he's still a detainee. He's still a defendant as if he were, I guess, awaiting his first trial, right?
Yeah, so he was granted a new trial, and what the state did at that point was they moved for what's known as a stay. So in other words, the findings of Judge Welch that he's entitled to a new trial is still there on the record, but the effect of that ruling, he gets released in a new trial, takes place, that was stayed. And so basically that's the posture we're in now, where we have these two now findings, Judge Welch and the Court of Special Appeals saying there's enough evidence here to grant him a new trial, and yet that ruling is stayed, meaning that it doesn't take effect, and we have to decide. It's sort of this state of limbo where his legal status is somewhere between guilty and not guilty.
Talk about the dissenting opinion. Is there anything in there of note?
Yeah, I mean, certainly if you're the state, you're probably using this as a template for how you're going to appeal to the Court of Appeals in Maryland. Judge Graff in her dissent is essentially saying, look, this is a case where Cristina Gutierrez is now deceased. She couldn't testify at the post-conviction proceeding as to why she didn't contact Asia McClain. And unlike the majority, Judge Graff is saying, look, there are reasons here to think it could have been strategy for Gutierrez not to contact Asia McClain. And Adnan Syed has not rebutted those and proved affirmatively that this was an omission as opposed to strategy. I'm not sure that I agree with her logic. I'm not sure that I think that her cases that she cites are on point. I think they're all sort of distinguishable. But there certainly is a lifeline that she's thrown to the state wherein they can now claim to the Court of Appeals, look, there's a judge that has said we should win. And there's some case law she cited. And that's more than the state had going into this appeal.
You know, there's some that say that it doesn't matter that the defense keeps winning lower court appeal after appeal because whoever loses the latest round is just going to appeal to another court. So is a win a victory in this process?
Well, first of all, it's quite possibly a final victory. This is something where statistics have shown somewhere between around 8 and 13% of cases that a party seeks to appeal to the Court of Appeals are accepted, which means, I guess, about 92 to 87% of cases aren't even heard by the Court of Appeals in Maryland. So, if the Court of Appeals in Maryland decides we're not going to allow the state to appeal, it's the end of the day. Adnan gets a new trial. Now, there's some complicating factors here. There is a dissenting opinion, and in 99% of these cases at the Court of Special Appeals, there's not a dissent. That makes it much likelier the Court of Appeals is going to allow the state to appeal. But yeah, there's a decent chance this is the final opinion in the case and Adnan gets a new trial. Beyond that, there's inertia in the legal system. Higher court judges are pretty loath to reverse lower court judges. In this case, we now have 2 levels of court opinions in Maryland saying Adnan should get a new trial. And that makes it somewhat less likely the Court of Appeals is going to reverse that and find actually the state wins and we're going to take away that new trial.
So handicap this. If you had to put a buck down, what do you think happens next?
For me, it's a coin flip as to whether the Court of Appeals allows the state to appeal. There are 7 judges or justices on that court, and 3 of those 7 have to agree to hear the case. And there are so many different considerations that come into play in that decision, it's impossible for me to say whether they'll take it or not. If the case does reach the Court of Appeals of Maryland, the highest court, I'm going to go 80-20, 80% chance that they affirm Adnan gets a new trial, 20% chance, 1 in 5, that they end up reversing.
And the chance that maybe they'll just skip the appeal and go right to a new trial?
Yeah, I'm going to go 50-50 on that. There's so many different considerations that can come into play in that. I just can't handicap that and say I think they're going to take it or not. It really could go either way.
Right, and there's still always the chance that the state will sort of give up the fight and say, okay, time served, or an Alfred plea or something like that as well, right?
That's in the air. They could offer a plea today and they could reach terms. And another thing that I've noted, which is kind of interesting, is I discussed the waiver issue before. That waiver issue that the Court of Special Appeals ruled against Adnan on, that's something the state could use in many cases down the road. And so looking at whether the state's going to appeal here, one consideration they have to have is we got a pretty good ruling at the Intermediate Appellate Court, and that's binding precedent. We might lose this case if we don't appeal, but that opinion could help us in dozens of other cases. So, yeah, they could offer a plea deal at this point. They could decide, even apart from the odds of winning, there are reasons not to appeal here.
So there's a longer game for them to be considering, not just Adnan Syed.
Yeah, potentially. If I put myself in their shoes, I'm thinking, yeah, this is a high-profile case. We might not want to give up. At the same time, 2 courts have ruled against us. And if we do appeal, that risks this waiver ruling. And that waiver ruling is going to help us in many cases. And so that's something they have to balance.
Professor Colin Miller, co-host of Undisclosed and the author of the Evidence Prof blog, thank you as always.
Sure, you're welcome.
Kevin.
Yes.
Thoughts on this new court ruling flipping its reasons for the ineffective assistance of counsel?
I said I was very surprised at that. Certainly, it's in the end, it's still good for Adnan. I mean, I guess on the cell tower stuff, because everybody was super excited about that. It just really seemed like a real great Columbo moment that Susan Simpson and the Undisclosed team sort of came up with, and it certainly won the day in Judge Welch's courtroom. I kept calling him Judge Welsh. Not that I got it wrong, but that's the 1/4 French in me.
Yeah.
It does the CH as an SH, so... but I digress. I was really surprised, though, that the Court of Special Appeals went back and looked at the Asia McClain issue and ruled that was evidence of ineffective assistance of counsel, only because Judge Welch kind of said, it doesn't matter because the timeline is still messed up, that it's almost like a moot point because the timeline is messed up. It doesn't matter when Asia came into play, what she could say.
That's what the first judge said.
The first judge said. And so this panel actually went back and dug a little deeper and said, no, actually, that makes a lot of sense. That's a winnable point. And while it doesn't discount the cell tower evidence, which I thought was really super strong, again, it sort of stops the clock before you can get to the idea that the fact sheet would have changed anything. It just ends up being this decision that's saying you can't bring that issue.
Right. So this is the thing that I just want to clarify.
Which is a win for the state.
I listened to this tape with Colin twice because
Yeah.
I edited it for this podcast before we all listened to it.
Right.
I also listened to the undisclosed discussion about it, and here's what I take away. What this court basically said was, you're not necessarily wrong that Cristina Gutierrez was a bad lawyer because she didn't do this cell tower thing. But you can't add that to your reasons for being a bad lawyer later.
Right.
When your main reason for her being a bad lawyer was just that she didn't contact this witness. Is that right, Kevin?
Yeah.
Okay, that's basically what they decided.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, Laura, isn't that your interpretation?
Yes, this is, and I was thinking about this as I was listening to the tape today, and I'm like, when we had our first discussions about Serial, and I was still like on my raw defense investigator, I'm like, that's like the first thing I would have done is gone out and talked to the alibi witness. So, even if it wasn't going to pan out, even if the alibi witness wasn't credible, you have to interview them. So I feel really, it's like this like moment of vindication that somebody else is agreeing on that. And that is the issue that is really at the heart of the argument here.
Yeah. Laura, I have a side question I want to ask you. So we don't know what's going to happen in the Adnan Syed case. As we heard Colin say, like, he could just get a new trial,
right,
or the state could make a deal, or they could drop the charge. It's like a lot of things that could happen. One of the things that could happen, though, is that he could get a new trial. Meantime, Jay Wilds has given like this interview with The Intercept that completely contradicts his original testimony. Asia McClain herself is on Twitter and social media talking about her role and wrote a book about her role as an alibi witness, which in my opinion, like, doesn't make her an ideal witness either in a weird way.
No.
Like, what would this trial look? I mean, you're a defense investigator. Like, what would this trial look like to you?
Shit show. No. So, I mean, I think that, what I would have been doing, and I think what any investigator that's involved is doing, is compiling every single statement that these witnesses have made to different people, different media outlets, and compiling them to use as possible impeachment material for these witnesses.
Right.
So, but it's confusing because, I mean, that's, at this point, there's been a lot of interviews, a lot of different places that people have been mentioned, like you said, a book. So, I think if it gets to that point, it's going to be on Adnan's side, getting those witnesses prepared by doing like mock cross-examinations on them so that they can really hold up when they are on the stand and confronted with something that maybe is a little different than what they're saying when they're testifying.
Right. So Toby, listening to the first season of Serial, I don't know how well you remember it, but there's one moment that sticks out to me, and that is when Sarah Koenig finally gets in touch with Asia McClain. And Asia McClain basically says, like, I figured if there was, I'm sorry, I'm going to misquote it, but I figured if there was like something that said he wasn't guilty, I would have heard about it. And Sarah Koenig says to Asia McClain, like, but I think you might be that thing.
Yeah.
I think you are that person. And this most recent ruling basically says, like, Asia McClain is that person. And Toby, we've had a lot of conversations on this show, debates about whether or not, this medium, podcasting in particular, is good or bad for the justice system. And here we have another court affirming that Adnan needs a new trial. But now this court, the higher court, pointing to the thing that Serial did. That, by the way, let's also give credit to Rabia for handing Sarah Koenig the piece of paper that said, like, call this person, please. Toby, what are your thoughts?
Well, I think, I've said it like many times, which is if you're in jail and you're innocent, or at least claim to be innocent, like the best thing to do is to get a podcast or a documentary made about you, because suddenly all this money starts pouring into this investigation and all this, attention starts getting paid and things like that. So again, without Serial, there's no way that this case gets even like 1% of the attention it's getting now. So yeah, as far as that stuff goes, like, I think it's definitely helpful for the person who is in jail to get that attention. I think our criticism about podcasts and the justice system has been more about people having this idea, I think based on Serial, that they're going to solve crimes in real time.
They can eat 12
Right. And yeah, so they go out and they're like, I'm going to do this.
Call back.
I think that's more of an issue than just the very idea that you're going to do true crime podcasts and that's going to start shining a lot more light on a particular case or particular people. So it's good for Adnan, clearly.
Can you just like clarify your remark that people don't think that maybe this is the first episode they've ever listened to of our show?
Well, that's James from Crime
That is kind of
Sports. Who went on a rant about citizen sleuths who are podcasters, thinking they're changing the world.
Yes.
And tell them they could eat 12 which is funny because, okay, here we have a case where, in those rare cases where the podcasts actually do something, both Serial and Undisclosed can take some credit in these legal arguments. But Toby, here I think is the flip side of that attention and fame that Serial brings to Adnan's case. The downside for him, I think that it becomes so high profile that the state is almost forced to try to defend this conviction as opposed to walk away from it. If this was a case that was on the back pages of the newspaper, they very easily could just say at some point, okay, appeal done, wiping my hands from it, and we're just going to drop the charges. But I feel like, and I don't know if any of you agree with me, that the prosecution kind of looks like it is motivated, or at least is compelled by the idea that they need to try to protect this conviction as opposed to try to get justice because of the publicity.
There's one weird thing that you talked about with Colin, but that didn't go where I thought it was going to go. You talked about the politics around this.
Yeah.
Thiru Vignaraja is running for office.
Right.
And I think when you talked to Colin about that, the conversation was about, like, do the judges on this panel intersect with his political career at all? That's not what I think about.
Yeah, what do you think about?
What I think about is the fact that he's running as like a liberal Democrat in this geographic area. He's soliciting donations from high-profile liberal people. And I know Rabia Chaudhry herself has called Dean Strang, one of the people is Dean Strang that she's called out for having donated to his campaign, and saying, like, you do know, right, that this is the guy who's the volunteer prosecutor who's trying to keep Adnan Syed in prison. So we have this guy who's running as like a liberal Democrat for this attorney. What is it? State's attorney's office.
State's attorney for Baltimore City.
And the thing he's trying to run on is keeping Adnan Syed in prison.
That's a really good point.
It's
and
weird.
So from the optics part of it, the PR part of it, if this is for political gain, that Thiru says, I'll jump in and take this case, how is he doing politically? Because to me, it seems like
it's the wrong case.
He's lost the justice advocates who are for Adnan. And for the people who are like, I'm for keeping the guy in prison, he's not doing a great job. Rebecca, you're Thiru's political advisor. Would you tell him he should take time to prepare for this appeal as opposed to running for office?
Here's what I think. And I only know this because I see our own podcast download demographic data. And podcast audience, any of you who doesn't like fit into this mold, I'm not talking about you. I'm talking about like just what we see, because we see it like from our own like audio host. You kind of see like not individual people, but just sort of general demographics of who's downloading your data. So the people who listen to true crime podcasts, we know this. This is a fact. We know
across the industry. Yeah.
Are
women,
middle class to upper middle class,
age 25 to 54,
educated,
yep.
Voters, people who are politically engaged,
professionals
who care about issues in their community, aside from crime and aside from everything. This is your, like, if you are running for office, this is who you're fighting for. The same people who listen to podcasts, like specifically technologically adept, people who watch the news. I just can't imagine your best look as someone who's running for office right now, especially as a Democrat and trying to win. I'm the guy trying to keep Adnan Syed in prison. I just don't see a lot of like people in our demographic. Yeah, I mean, there are people who say like, they don't know. I think Adnan's guilty, whatever. It's just a weird fight to pick when you also know you're running for office.
I don't want to hijack the show, but can we go around the horn and say, does Serial deserve credit for this particular appeals win?
Yes.
Because of the Asia McClain issue?
Let me just say this. And I mean
not taking away from Justin Brown.
No, I mean it. Rabia deserves credit for pursuing a journalist to do the story.
Sure.
Serial deserves credit for doing the story, period. Like, the story that they did was the one that reached what's down more than 500 million times. Yeah. Serial deserves that credit. The Asia McClain issue was at the heart of that. And the cell tower thing that Susan uncovered would never have been something that she would have looked to uncover had not Serial done that as a whole episode in their podcast.
Yeah. But I mean, in this, certainly the cell tower stuff won the day last time.
Serial deserves the credit.
Asia McClain wins it this time, so Serial gets the
they get the W. But Rabia always gets the W before it.
Agrees?
Serial wouldn't have had the story were not for her.
I think we should take credit for this.
Oh, we should. Right. Yeah.
100%.
Our
came in
pithy
at
analysis,
episode 10.
I think. Yeah,
exactly.
Might have put it over the top.
Totally.
So you're welcome.
You're welcome, people. You are welcome.
Yeah.
So, Kevin, quick question for you. What do you think of? You're the one who interviewed Colin.
Yeah.
And usually it's me who interviews like the special people. So I sent you down to the basement.
You were busy.
I was busy, and I was like, "Go interview Legal Siri." You went in cold.
Mm-hmm.
You did a very good job, by the way.
Prepared a couple of questions.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
What did you think of Colin's breakdown?
It was a great breakdown, unlike those bad breakdowns that you get that require you calling yourmechanic.com.
Wait, what?
Yeah,
what are you talking about? As a sponsor?
Yeah, yourmechanic.com sends the mechanic right to your home or office. Better yet, at your mechanic, you can get the quote up front, and that is the actual price you pay. So, like right now, we're doing this podcast.
Yes.
I could be getting my oil changed right now by your mechanic, or doing some tune-ups or things like that.
Is that a code word?
Listen, I'm
not a code word.
Sorry, but I'm thinking this is a good way to find dates. I mean, I don't know.
It's not that kind of website.
I don't want to take away from yourmechanic.com, but that transition was so rapid. Can you just go back and explain what yourmechanic.com is again? Because I feel a little bit like hornswoggled? What was that? What was that?
Yourmechanic.com is a service
yes.
that a mechanic will go to you, your home or your office, and do repairs on your car or your truck. And that way you don't have to do the thing where you like try to make some time and get out of work and bring the car to the garage.
You mean that thing I did yesterday with our son's car where I took it there and it was a whole appointment? I don't have to worry about that.
You don't have to worry about
They
that.
could just come to our house.
They come to your house wherever you want. And they back up every service with a 12,000-mile, 12-month warranty. And you can also get a full background check on their mechanics. They'll have on an average 10 years worth of experience. So if your car won't stop, the check engine light keeps bugging you.
That's really bad. I think you may want to start.
If it's a self-driving car. Running people over, call your mechanic.
Well, call today, schedule your appointment, or visit yourmechanic.com/crime. And a mechanic will come to your home or office. For a limited time now, you can get $20 off your first service. You can actually call now as well. Call 800-701-6230. We'll put the phone number in our show notes.
You will?
800-701-6230, or go to yourmechanic.com/crime.
Crime. I am fascinated by that sponsor. I'm going to go to that website immediately after we stop recording this podcast. Kevin, what else do you
have pictures of the mechanics you can choose from?
God damn it, Laura. You had to go there.
Swipe left.
They don't have that kind of tool for your rental, Laura.
Okay.
I'd like to get a lube job.
Can you have him bring his socket set? What else you got, Kevin?
Want to get jacked up. Hey, look, Rebecca, you'd never turn down free money, right?
No one ever offers it to me, but if they did, I would not turn it down.
Look, but if you shop online without the best coupons, you're already paying too much. But fortunately, there's a free browser extension called Honey that automatically finds the best coupons on the web, so you always get the best prices on everything online.
I already know about Honey, and I already use Honey. I love it. Even though I didn't know they were a sponsor of the show, this reaction right now, 100% authentic. I'm so excited.
Do you want to tell people?
Nope, you go ahead and tell them.
Okay, it's 2 clicks, and you can add Honey to your browser, and you just shop like you normally do. You can go to Honey, and you can find out all sort of coupon codes that you can use at all sorts of shopping websites, the ones you know, ones you've never heard of, just browse through, and you go through and boom, you get that best deal. They keep searching, like every hour they're updating for like the best deal and coupons and other codes. 7 million people use Honey every day, and they've saved millions of dollars. I said, okay, I'll try it. I didn't know my wife already does this. This is probably why so much stuff keeps showing up at my house, because she can afford it. I went to Honey, looked through the different stuff, saved $100 on a pair of glasses.
Yep.
With a coupon code. That's a lot of money, people.
You know that amazing stereo speaker that showed up at our house today?
Shut up. With Honey?
Honey deal.
Yeah, in fact, when you use the extension, sometimes you go to some of the different shopping sites. Honey is there.
Yes.
It appears on the website.
It's like magic.
Yeah,
it's like a Hogwarts ghost, just showing you what you could be spending.
It'll tell you the best price, and if that is the best price that you're looking at the moment, you can even get an alert. Tell me in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days if this price goes down.
Yeah.
There's no reason not to add Honey to your browser today. It's free, and it just takes seconds to install, and you will save a ton of money. So add Honey to your browser for free right now at joinhoney.com/crime.
Crime.
Don't go to honey.com. It's a whole different website.
Ooh.
That's joinhoney.
Joinhoney.com/crime. Crime. Honestly, I personally recommend it. I didn't even know they were going to be a sponsor. I've been using it for a long time.
We need to talk more.
All right. Moving on. Panoply is out with a 7-part podcast called Empire on Blood.
I think it was a Wednesday evening, 2011. The phone rang in my apartment. A prisoner was on the line. The inmate said he was wrongfully convicted of a double homicide. He had evidence, he told me, and he said he needed my help. I hesitated, and then I told him I'd look into it. And that launched my obsession to get to the truth behind one murder case.
Empire on Blood is magazine writer Steve Fishman's 7-year relationship with crack dealer Calvin Buari, who was in jail for more than 20 years for a double homicide that he said he didn't commit. To tell the story of Calvin's search for justice, Fishman meets Cal's drug-dealing frenemy and a prosecutor who rescues turtles, and a cop who's too good at getting confessions, and a private eye who carries a Bible, a gun, and a bottle of wine. So, listeners, we are going to be discussing some spoilers in our discussion about Empire on Blood. So if you'd rather hear our review or recommendation of whether or not you should listen without the discussion, just take a look at the show notes for the timestamp to which you can skip to get our thumbs up or thumbs down review. I feel like I would not be fair in bringing up this podcast without just throwing something on the table. Something I said to you, Kevin, before you started listening. Yeah. Steve Fishman, the journalist behind this podcast, he has a unique writing style. But more than that, he reads his own writing in a unique way.
Long ago, Calvin Buari made headlines in New York City. Back then, he seemed to be one of the most dangerous and flamboyant crack dealers in all the 5 boroughs, ruining neighborhoods while wearing mink.
Laura, thoughts?
Oh boy, you're coming right to me. It took some adjusting too for me. He has a way, I don't want to pick apart the way someone talks, but just the way of enunciating certain words and delivering the story that can be a little distracting if you focus on that rather than what he's saying, if that makes sense.
I mean, I know it's a little different, and it's not his conversational voice. He's reading his writing voice. And he's not a radio or audio guy by nature.
He should be. He did the Ponzi Supernova podcast, which was a big podcast.
Right, but I mean, his pedigree is in print.
Yes.
I know that I've been looking on Facebook, and there are a lot of people who have a lot of problems with his relationships with the subjects and the way that he reads his copy. But I like it. I like that it's very much like a storytelling kind of podcast. Mm-hmm. Which I don't think we hear enough of. So I know I don't know if I'm in the minority or not, but I liked it.
It's a little performative for me, quite honestly. It reminded me a little bit of the Heaven's Gate podcast.
Yes. Yep.
It wasn't my favorite, and sometimes I found it a little frustrating, and other times it didn't bother me at all.
Right.
There is an adjustment period, and you compare it to, say, Connie Walker, and she just comes across as more authentic, I guess.
Yep.
But, it didn't ruin my experience or anything like that. It was just a feature that I didn't necessarily enjoy as much.
It didn't take you so far out of the story that it became a distraction.
No.
Well, here's what I would compare it to. So we talked a while ago when it first came out about Crime Town. And Crime Town is hosted by two guys who have a certain like manner of speech and delivery.
Right.
But in Crime Town, you also hear those guys talk to people, and you hear their ads, and in their ads and in their talking to people, they sound the same as they do when they're narrating the podcast. And in this podcast, you hear Steve in interviews and in conversations on the phone and even in his ads, and he sounds different in those things than he sounds when he's doing his narration. So to me, it is a choice to narrate the show a certain way. Mm-hmm. And you either have to go with it or be distracted by it. And you as a listener have to choose. To me, that is a bug, not a feature, because you're challenging the listener to choose in a way that could be distracting from, tipping my hand, what I think is a super interesting story. So let's get beyond that. I just want to throw it out there first because I do feel like that is the first impression people will get. And I just wanted to throw it out there. And I think it's important to acknowledge that the style is there. So let's talk about the main character here, Calvin Buari. We first hear he's a crack dealer in the Bronx who made the choice to bring the business from Brooklyn to the Bronx. I do think that the character Steve talks to, they just talk about like the economy of what's going on at that time. And this is not like a super news story. We do know that there's limited opportunity for people growing up in certain neighborhoods and that like this is part of that opportunity. So, you know, we have a drug dealer now living in the Bronx and that's sort of our main character, Calvin. Is this a character right out of the gate that we want to root for? Kevin, what do you think?
I don't know. I mean, I think certainly Stephen does a good job of sort of providing context for explaining what 1990s New York was like with the pre-Giuliani era and when Giuliani became mayor and the whole idea of super predators and whatnot. And I think we hear that sort of in the second to last podcast where it's where Cal's attorney's like, you know, the prosecution thinks this is still 1990.
Yeah.
But yeah, for certain, we've got a guy who is flamboyant but is selling drugs to people, ruining the neighborhood.
Did he kill two people in a car in cold blood?
That we don't know.
And that is like the whole thing here, right?
Right, exactly.
And this is the thing that I think a lot of true crime podcasts challenge us with is, are we talking about a perfect defendant? No. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I think Serial is such a compelling story for people. Because on the one hand, you either have an honors student who's just like any other 16-year-old who like maybe smoked a little pot and did something that like every like 16-year-old does, or who might be a psychopathic murderer. You know what I mean? But in a lot of real stories, like the ones that Laura has worked on as a defense investigator, you have imperfect defendants who maybe didn't commit the crime.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say, Rebecca. You know me too well. I mean, a lot of cases I worked on, you have people that are not likable. You have people that have bad facts in their life. You have people that don't look ideal when you get them into court. But at the same time, they may not be guilty, or they may not be guilty of what they're totally charged with. They may be guilty of some of it, not all of it. But at the same time, you're not going to always have this person that is like you said, honor student or perfect angel that you want to root for who just found themselves in the wrong place at the wrong time. You're going to have real people who are involved in situations, but what actually happened may not be what they were charged with.
Now, one of the things that's very interesting to me about Empire on Blood is Steve's relationship with Calvin, also with another character, Dwight, who we'll talk about in a minute, who's sort of the frenemy / betrayer of Calvin. It's very complicated. He also develops real relationships with the other side, with Turtle Man, the main prosecutor, Alan Caron, with, you know, less so with Father Frank Vigiano and his huge boat and like that whole weird thing, and with P.I. Joe Barry, but like mostly the primary relationships he has with the two guys who are in prison, Calvin and Dwight. And we see a lot, and I think this was a criticism that came out a lot in Serial Season 1, like with Sarah Koenig, you know, in her phone calls to Adnan where they talked about what he's cooking in the kitchen and all the other stuff, like, you know, is she crossing a line where she's not being objective? And we saw her in a lot of interviews, and we discussed this a lot in the podcast. Like, that's kind of a bullshit thing. When you're reporting a story for a long time, you have to develop a relationship. It's just a question of whether or not you show it in your reporting or not. Steve Fishman was super transparent about showing those relationships in this whole story. Toby, what did you think about that?
I didn't really have a big problem with it. You are kind of put in a weird situation where you end up, or at least I think the intention is that you end up rooting for this guy who, was, I think, sort of undeniably a bad guy back in the day. But I didn't really have a problem with it. And I think in order to produce something like this, you have to have some kind of relationship, as you said. And I think it's hard if you're going to be sort of that intimately involved for that period of time. Like, you're either going to end up liking the guy or you're going to really hate him.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't surprise me. And I think the fact that he's pretty upfront about it is fine. And that's just kind of the nature of the beast, I think.
I actually agree with you. And to all of our detractors on our Facebook group and other places I've seen, what Steve is doing here, which is different and that I really, really like, is he's just saying it. He's saying, I came to like this guy. I have a relationship with this guy. And he is including tape that I think some people might say compromises him. I'm putting that in quote marks as a journalist, but that a lot of journalists actually do, and they just don't include in their story. I think about our book, Kevin, Our Little Secret, where I went to the prison a bunch of times to interview the killer in that story. And I think of all of the conversations we had, which were just friendship style conversations, which weren't fake. Like, I liked the guy. I became friends with him. I care very much about whether or not he has the right coat when he's going outside. I care very much about how he feels about his family and like his pain. I care about all of that, and I cared about it. We couldn't and didn't include that in the book because that wasn't like the story that our editor would let us tell. Podcasting is different.
It was a good epilogue, though.
What did you think of that, Kevin?
Well, I think that the concern that people have, it's on two fronts. One is whether or not it's ethical at all to do this. Is he being genuine when he talks to Dwight and to Cal and he's being their friends? Is he, it's one thing if he's like genuine but misguided, but is he just, playing them off or whatever? And if he is that a problem? The other thing that is more my concern is, or the thing that I would be concerned about, is whether or not it's sort of, and we've talked about this before, it's like, who does he serve? Whose water is he carrying?
Right.
He can either be the advocate for the audience, which means to probe all of the different stories and the angles and the things that are wrong and the inconsistencies in the stories of Cal and the others, or he can be the advocate for his friends, for Cal.
Mm-hmm.
And is he just telling Cal's story at the expense of what the audience learns? And it's hard to get that balance.
Right.
But he's transparent about the fact that, yeah, I've come to have a relationship with the guy. I like him. But he also points out things when he's testifying and saying he didn't carry guns. No, I have tape of him saying he carried guns. Things like that.
He betrays him.
Yeah.
Well, what do you think?
But I don't have a position on that. Other than I think that's a concern.
I'm just curious. And I mean, I understand the concern.
Yeah.
But I do think he does it fairly with everyone. Like the thing that I like about this, and I think I said this to you when I was way ahead of you in listening to it. I finished it before you did.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, I think that this is like a fully immersive reporting experience where he developed relationships with everyone and puts everything he had in there. The place where that shows the most is his relationship with this guy, Dwight. And for listeners who have not listened to this podcast yet, basically...
we're in the spoiler area. They should have listened to this podcast.
But if they haven't, and there's like the bare bones of the story is this guy, Calvin, is accused of killing these two brothers in a car. Dwight... through a series of events that I'm not going to go super into, at one point he was friends with Calvin on the streets for a while. He kind of saw Calvin as a brother. He says at one point in the podcast, Calvin was like, "No, our relationship wasn't really like that. He's just a dude I knew." But for Dwight, the relationship was more important. It turns out like Dwight is at different times either a witness for Cal, but then turns on Cal and becomes a witness against Cal, but then doesn't show up for the hearing where he could deliver that. He changes his mind. And then at one point, Dwight confesses to the murder that Cal is in prison for and becomes like perhaps the exonerating witness against Cal. It's very complicated. And Steve is equal parts talking on the phone with both of them, like sending them both clothing and like having this like supportive relationship with both of them. Also visiting Turtle Man at his house with all of his turtles. He's all in with everyone. And that's, I
love it.
I don't, Laura, that's why I don't have a problem with it.
He is all in with everyone. And I think his boundaries are a little blurred here, but he is transparent about it. The thing that I thought about when I was kind of trying to put that all in perspective was, he got the trust of everybody that was involved in this case. And had he not let his boundaries down somewhat to form those relationships, he wouldn't have had that level of trust, and he wouldn't have had this story to the level that he had this story.
Right. Yep.
So, so I think that's how he got the story that he got. I wouldn't call it like the same type of journalism as like, I mean, it's a little bit different, but I loved all the details of these people that he was just like cruising around with, and he's riding the train with the guy with the wine in his bag, and he's like hanging out with the turtles. And I mean, it was just, there was a lot of really quirky details that made you feel like he was kind of sitting around telling you this story like one of his friends at his bar.
The more we kind of talk about it, I think there are like the usual concerns about, journalists forming relationships with people that they are ultimately going to exploit. And I think what's a little bit different here is that the people who at the end probably feel most exploited are like Turtle Man, who he ends up being pretty negative about in the end. But I don't know.
Is he more negative about Turtle Man than he is about everybody else? I mean, basically, Turtle Man, he says, the guy said he never got a thing overturned, but that's not true. And with Calvin, he said this on the stand, and that's not true. Like, he
Right.
calls people out on their bullshit, I think, kind of equally in this.
But I think my sense was, my sense about his feelings about Turtle Man were that when Turtle Man, he's basically like, oh, yeah, it's just bullshit. Like, Cal paid those women off to give this testimony to get himself free. And I think the position on that was that's bullshit. And I think part of that is Steve, being more or less in Cal's corner. I mean, you can be in somebody's corner and still call them on their bullshit, right?
Right.
But he's obviously very, very happy when Cal gets out.
Well, he's decided to include that tape in the podcast. I mean, I think a lot of journalists would react the same way if they'd been working on a story for a long time. I really do.
Years, yeah.
And I'm sorry to say, like, there are no journalists who get in that close with a story like this and then don't also have a legitimate human reaction when there's a big break. He just made the choice to include that tape, which I thought was a super interesting choice. And I think what people are reacting to when they're saying he's too close, he's whatever, he's like, no, he's just showing you. I don't know. I mean, that's how I felt. Now, Kevin, I have a style choice question for you.
All right.
I thought that Steve did something really clever here. The whole podcast, you know how, we hear things when we listen to things, we listen critically because, I've both worked in news,
right?
About editing. And we'll sometimes say, like, this person should have edited this out. Like we talked about Connie Walker a couple weeks ago of like, you would have edited out some of the rhetorical question stuff or whatever.
Right.
You hear the lack of editing. It's actually really hard to hear editing. My strong impression in this show is that Steve did a great job cutting out a lot of stuff we didn't need to know and a lot of characters we didn't need to have. So he boiled himself down to sort of like 8 central characters. And then he gave them all, very cleverly, I thought, nicknames. Almost everyone had a nickname.
It's like Father Frank and
Evelina.
I love them.
The key witness,
right?
Which wasn't her name. It was her nickname she gave herself, and he would embrace her nickname. Turtle Man, which is not Turtle Man. It's the first prosecutor in the case. You have Calvin Bouari, but we know him. You have Dwight. So they're the only people with real names. Almost everyone else in this podcast has a nickname. And then you think about all the other people that he had to have talked to report this are just out of it. Is that not paring down and editing?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good editing to cut out, as we would say on the page, dead wood.
Right.
That, you keep it as tight as you can with as few extraneous details and characters as you can get. Sometimes those are great. They add different kinds of color and depth. But for this kind of story, I think it was great that the color was added by his language and his observations, and not by necessarily bringing in everybody that was in the neighborhood. You know, I mean, we hear in I think it was episode 1, we heard one guy from the neighborhood who was a dealer, and I'm trying to remember what his name was. We didn't hear from his name mentioned again till the last episode. But he wasn't like a recurring character. We didn't keep hearing him talking about the good old days,
right.
When we bring in Dwight and somebody like gets his opinion about Dwight, just kind of did his thing, moved on.
Right.
I thought it was good. I thought it made it a lot tighter.
And there was probably a lot of other historical context,
Sure.
a lot of other people he talked to get the information that we heard, but like you don't need to hear everybody's voices. I don't know. I heard a lot of good editing in this. That was the strongest thing
You
about
mean
it.
audio editing or
no,
copy
story
editing?
editing.
Yeah.
Not audio editing. Story editing.
Yeah,
Like,
I mean, for the things that people don't like about the way the narrator read his script, I think that if you just looked at the copy on the paper,
The writing
whole
was-
thing,
the writing
like as
was
a
very
monster magazine article,
yeah.
I think you'd say like this is really good.
I think the writing was very strong. All right, so I have a
Because
question
if that's
for you
not
guys.
good, the rest of it's not going to be good.
Because the one thing we have to address is Dwight.
Okay,
Dwight is a character that
poet of evil.
goes back and forth from being an advocate for Calvin to the enemy of Calvin and the betrayer. He's the Judas of the story. He's a complicated character, and yet Steve is as close to him as he is to Calvin in some ways. Laura, what did you think of Dwight and his claims of not knowing anything / actually being the killer / being Calvin's best friend / what did you think of Dwight, and what did you think of Steve's relationship with him?
I think it's about par for the course for like somebody that's been involved in the type of criminal activity he had been involved in and kind of his background before he went to jail. So, the changing story, depending on who you're talking to, that doesn't really surprise me. I'm glad it all worked out in the end. I thought it was really interesting when you're listening to these phone calls when that was one of the things I liked when you're listening to the relationship form between Steve and Dwight or Steve and Cal, and they're having these phone calls about these just sort of normal everyday things. And at one point, I think, Steve says, "I'm sorry to be talking about this." And he's like, "No, I like to hear what's happening out there." I don't know, remember which guy said that. It was interesting, the level of information they were sharing about their lives with each other. Like Steve's talking about going camping with his kids. And some people really put up that wall when they are at work in terms of not sharing that kind of information.
Yeah.
So I think it was pretty clever on Steve's part in forming this relationship with Dwight, because it's like he gives a little information, Dwight gives a little information.
Right.
So in a way, his sharing information about what he was doing in his life gave Dwight that sort of feeling of, he's sharing with me, I can share with him.
Right. But we also know that Steve is grappling with this idea that Dwight might be the bad guy here. Dwight might be the killer.
Yes.
Dwight has confessed to the killing.
Yes.
Dwight has also betrayed the protagonist in Steve's story. Like, straight up betrayed him. Like, that's complicated.
Yeah, why does Dwight cuddle up with both Cal and with Steve if he is the trigger man? Is it a keep your enemies closer kind of thing or something else?
I think Dwight is lower on the totem pole. I think there's an excellent chance Dwight committed the crime. And I think there's an excellent chance that over time, Cal would forgive him, or at least he thinks that. And I think he's playing both sides of the coin. I think Steve knows he's playing both sides of the coin. And he's fostering this relationship knowing that. But here's the complicated question, and it comes up at the end of the podcast. Dwight may or may not be the bad guy. We've heard Steve continue to struggle with his own relationship with him, and yet still offer to send him clothes and all the stuff they're doing.
Porno mags.
Exactly.
That was the best one. He asked
Sure,
us to
Dwight.
Max. I was like, sure.
Was that before or after he pissed off the guards by masturbating in his cell?
Oh,
Exactly.
Jesus Christ.
Exactly.
He needs some Brooklyn and sheets.
Oh, Jesus, Rebecca. Oh,
no.
Oh, Laura.
Oh no!
Needs Brooklyn and sheets.
It's true. But we also hear one point, Steve,
Several pairs of
super
apparently.
interesting conversation, and one that I can relate to, having had with somebody who was in prison, when he's telling him about his plan to beat somebody up, and he's like, "You shouldn't be telling me this," but at the same time, he's also like, "You should be telling me this because I'm taping it, and it's really good for the podcast." It gets weird, right?
Yeah. But you find out he's only saying that so the guards will hear it.
Right. Allegedly.
And get the thing,
Allegedly.
Well, it works out in his favor.
But at the very end, We know that Steve has had these deep relationships with these guys. He's, sent the camera crew to follow Calvin back to visit his mother after he's exonerated.
Interesting scene, too.
He is there when Calvin finally gets out of prison after this whole mishap about all that bullshit
Paperwork.
stuff. It's crazy.
Jesus.
He's in it. He's in it. Flash forward, Calvin is out. Calvin is starts his own business. Everything seems good. But then, I don't think too surprisingly, he becomes lost. He's living in a van. He's not doing well. And Steve is still reporting the story. And as a listener, you kind of feel like, with any other story that's being reported by somebody who's a little bit neutral, you're like, oh, that's really too bad. But with Steve, you're like, why can't you give Cal a job? Why can't you let him work at Herbs?
Be a bar back.
Herbs. I know. Instead of driving the van back and
to me, that's where the problem with the lack of objectivity comes in, right? Like you can report
draw
the story
a line somewhere,
and you can be my friend, but you're not going to actually help me when I tell you I'm sleeping in my van. I don't know. That's
you don't know if he's asked for the help.
And by the way, I'm not saying that Steve is wrong here. I'm just saying as a listener, it's like I don't know. Am I the only one who felt weird about that?
I felt like he was kind of kicking him while he was down a little bit. I was just like, ugh, the whole ending was so depressing. It was and then it's like he's in the van. He's not acclimating to life on the outside. I mean, he's got this job that he's this little business he started, but it's still
Genius
a connection
business,
to the
by
prison,
way, which is weird.
It is, but it's also it's like he's maintaining this connection to the prison because that's still what he knows in terms of his world view. And it was very sad. And then the scene with his mother, I felt like that went on 5 minutes too long. I'm like, enough. It's it was just depressing at that point. I just felt like it was almost, I wouldn't say exploiting this guy, but I just felt I don't know if anyone else felt like that about the scene with the mother, but I just felt like it was just really tragic to listen to. And I felt 30 seconds of that would have sufficed, but the ongoing repetitive nature of that whole scene I was like, oh.
Toby, what did you think about sort of how this relationship culminated? This guy gets out, we hear all the emotional fallout, and then we hear, not surprisingly, things are not great for him. And yet, Steve is here. Steve, by the way, and I would love for someone to just talk about the fact that he talks about his bar 4 times.
Herbs? Who wants to go to Herbs?
Yeah. It's a free ad. Am I wrong?
Hey,
it is.
I'd take the shot.
Maybe that's where we can have our live podcast event if we go to New York City.
Go to Brooklyn.
I'm not lying. If I owned a bar, I would talk about it on this podcast every damn time we did this podcast. I cannot blame Steve for doing that. That being said,
you can support this podcast at patreon.com/IrvsBar.
No, Partners in Crime Media. Toby, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that he chose to put that in and sort of raise that question. I think that way lies madness to a certain extent.
Yep.
And while he did kind of he obviously did a lot to get him out of prison as part of pursuing a story, but there does come a point where the story is kind of over. Do you maintain lifelong relationships with all the people that you do stories on?
Well, in my world, sometimes I do.
Involuntarily.
Well, maybe unintentionally.
Kevin, of the 4 of us, I think you could probably speak to this the most. You reported on a case on one of the books that you wrote, Wicked Intentions, and you became really close with the mother of one of the victims. You also became pretty close with the sister of the serial killer. You're still Facebook friends and
with both of them.
Interact with these
They're Facebook
people.
friends with each other.
Isn't it hard? I mean, I know from the books we've written where I've interacted with people, when you're done, you do kind of have to move on. It's tough, but you do.
Correct.
Right.
You do. Yes.
But
the answer is yes, you have to move on.
But you also, when you write a book, it's on a shelf and it's done. When you're in a podcast, the format's a little different.
It's different if the relationship is that this guy can call you whenever he wants.
Right.
From behind bars or whatever.
Dwight is still going to be calling Steve.
Yeah.
I guarantee it. It's Steve's choice whether he picks
How
up
did the
or not.
podcast go, Steve?
Right.
And
am I getting my chuckas?
What about my porn?
Yeah, I mean that's it. It ends up being to what end? How does this end?
Right.
For you? And I can understand why with Cal, he maintains this relationship because he is working on a story. Cal knows that, and he's involved in all this other stuff, and so to him professionally, it's worth it to maintain the relationship.
But Cal also did say to him at one point, like, the reason I want to be out is to be surrounded by genuine people who love me like you. Like that was implied there, right? Like you're one of the people who genuinely love me.
Yeah, and I think Steve
he said
right?
he loved him, didn't he? He said, "I love you" at one point.
He did. He did.
Yeah.
That's what makes it rough. And I actually think it's up to the listener to decide how they feel about that. I really do. I don't think it's right or wrong. I think it's transparent. It's up to the listener to decide. So on that note, why don't we do that thing that we do and go around the horn and just tell our listeners, should they check out Empire on Blood by Steve Fishman and Panoply? Laura Bricker, I'm going to start with you. Thumbs up or thumbs down for Empire on Blood?
I'm going with thumbs up. It took me, like I said, a little bit to adjust to the narration style, but I am a person who gives nicknames to everybody. I have like nicknames for everybody in my town, so I loved his use of nicknames.
A lot of
I'm just
turtlemen.
going to say we have a Plankton in our town from SpongeBob.
We've got
I
a
won't
piss
tell you who it
belly in
is.
our town.
Piss belly.
You know. So we have a piss pants. I won't tell you the story of that. So I loved all that, and I loved all, like, I'm somebody who gravitates to kind of these quirky character details. So I was like right up my alley, and it had a satisfying ending. Obviously, it was good, and it was a really interesting story, and I loved the level of access that he had to all the people that were involved.
Toby, thumbs up or thumbs down to Empire on Blood?
I'll give it a thumbs up. I think the problem with the thumbs up, thumbs down thing is that in the past, like, month and a half, between West Cork and Missing and Murdered season 2, we've listened to 2 really, really good podcast series, and I don't think this is up to that standard. But it's still good. It's got a lot of interesting stuff in it. So I would recommend it.
Yeah, I'm going to give it a thumbs up too. When I first started listening, I immediately, just as an audio person, and I'm just going to address it one more time. When you hear somebody deliver narration in a certain style, and it is stylized, what Steve Fishman decides to do with his narration. And in later episodes, it actually kind of calms down quite a bit, but especially in the first couple episodes, it's an aggressively stylized reading style. That sounds, as I said to you, like he's doing an impression of Ice-T and SVU. It is potentially off-putting. Do not let yourself be put off by that, because there is a whole lot of there in the story. I do really like Steve's reporting. I love his transparency. He sort of breaks through all of the bullshit journalism stuff where you can't be close and you can't do this and you can't do that. He breaks through it because, as Laura pointed out, he also talks to the prosecutor. He also talks to the prosecutor's investigator. He also talks to the private eye. He also talks to the witnesses. He has everyone, and he gives everyone equal weight. And he does disclose that he's become friendly with the guy that is ultimately at the center of this. So I loved it. I absolutely loved it, despite all the things I just said that were critical about Steve's delivery. I think it's a choice. I'm not saying it's bad. It's just a choice that I think might be off-putting to some people. But ultimately, there's enough there that I forgive the choice, and I really like the podcast. Big thumbs up for me. What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm also a thumbs up. I recognize that Steve's delivery style kind of made him a character in the story himself. I mean, obviously he's a first-person participant. This is first-person journalism. The question often becomes, whose story is it? Is it the reporter's? Is it the subject? I think this remains Cal's story, and Steve is an interesting character in it, and he tells you right up front as a storyteller who you're going to meet. And you follow along, and you live and die on Cal's story.
Yep.
And I think it's good. Yeah, I mean, it's stylized. Maybe it's not everybody's cup of tea, but it definitely worked for me. And he deserves some credit, if for nothing else, from working for 7 years on a particular story.
Yeah, it's a long time.
It is a long time.
Yeah.
It's
especially when editors turned him down, as he says in the podcast.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. It's not just like Googling a story and then reading it on a podcast.
Exactly.
It's like some real elbow grease put into that, and that's a lot of material you got to sift through And, like with me, when I've got a bunch of old stuff sitting around, old photos,
This is going somewhere.
old videotapes,
I think you just say where it's going.
film,
Yeah?
I turned to Legacy Box, the world's largest, most trusted digitizer of home movies and photos. They're here to help.
All right.
Did you see the photo I posted from high school?
I did.
When we went to France?
I did. You were really, really unattractive in that photo.
Oh, no, come on now. I was 16 and I had it going on. But I had a bunch of photos that I took with those disc cameras. Who remembers the disc camera? Do you remember?
I remember.
Do you remember how the film was in that? How
so
it looked like
stupid.
Yeah, it was like a daisy, for crying out loud.
It was so stupid.
Well, I had all the prints. I sent them to Legacy Box. They were able to scan them. Yeah, you could spend 6 days with that scanner that you bought and put all those photographs in it, but you don't have time to do that.
Nope.
Legacy Box does it right, and it also does it great for film. Now, I'm telling you what I'm sending next.
All right, ready.
So my parents have had home movies on film. I remember watching these films when I was a baby. My parents went out to California to visit my aunt.
Uh-huh.
And they took the Kodak camera with all the
Super
film.
8?
Super 8, exactly. I remember this one scene watching it years later. My dad was running the camera, and he was panning on the beach, following my mom, holding my hand, walking on the sand. And a girl in a bikini walks the other way, and he turns and follows her in the frame. And then he cuts back to my mother, who has stopped walking and is yelling at him. I want to see that on video, and I can with Legacy Box.
I want to see that too.
Well, there's never been a better time to digitally preserve your old home movies, film reels, and photos. Visit legacybox.com today to get started. Plus, for a limited time, they're offering listeners a huge exclusive discount. Go to legacybox.com/crime to get 40% off your first order. With this exclusive deal, Legacy Box starts at just $45. Or save up to $200 on the largest Legacy Box kit. So go to legacybox.com/crime. Save 40% today. Start with just a few tapes or digitize your entire collection. Visit legacybox.com/crime and enter our code CRIME to save 40% on your Legacy Box today. Start preserving your past.
What else you got, Kevin?
Well, Fab Fit Fun is the seasonal subscription box that delivers full-size fashion, beauty, home, fitness, wellness products, all to busy women for a life well lived. So about 4 times a year, and at just about $49.99 a box, Fab Fit Fun is a fantastic value because there are no sample sizes of anything. You get a box, but it's not like the little container.
I bet you money Laura's wearing her Fab Fit Fun poncho right now.
I actually am because it's kind of getting cold again. So I'm wrapped up in it. It's so cozy and soft. I love it.
It is.
The individual product's value is often more than the entire box. Don't worry if you miss the seasonal box because there's a great spring editor's box with favorites from spring and other past seasons. And the spring editor's box has a lot more customization options, from a clutch to eyeshadow to lip gloss. If you haven't signed up yet, it's not too late. Try Fab Fit Fun today. Go to fabfitfun.com to subscribe and start getting the box for a life well lived. Use promo code CRIME to get $10 off your first box. So that's products valued at $200, all for only $39.99. Go to fabfitfun.com and use our code CRIME to get $10 off your first Fab Fit Fun box.
Now it's time for my favorite part of this podcast, a little something I like to call the crime of the week. Remember that time a flock of seagulls trashed a hotel room? No, not the band Flock of Seagulls.
I ran.
An actual,
I ran so far away.
An actual flock of seagulls. Now, 2 decades later, the hotel has lifted the lifetime ban on the hapless guest behind it. Nick Burchill of Nova Scotia had been staying at Victoria's Empress Hotel in 2001. To give as a gift to local friends, Burchill brought with him spicy Nova Scotia pepperoni. But with no refrigerator in the room, he decided to cool it on the windowsill.
Perfect. What could go wrong?
When Burchill returned to his room, he opened the door to find at least 40 seagulls gorging themselves on all that delicious cured meat. Once they were spotted, all of the birds tried to desperately get out underneath the cracked window they'd crawled through. As Burchill put it, quote, "The result was a tornado of seagull excrement, feathers, pepperoni chunks, and fairly large birds whipping around the room." The maid was not happy. Burchill was moved to another room, but later banned for life from the hotel. Fast forward to the
Seems
present.
a little harsh.
Burchell's company booked him in a room at the Empress for a conference, and the hotel told his boss he wasn't welcome there. In true Canadian fashion, he wrote a heartfelt apology letter. The hotel forgave him after he said he was sorry. No word on whether the maid has also accepted his apology. Question, panel. This room trashing was a big headache for the hotel.
Fucking hysterical.
What is the biggest problem you have ever created for hotel management? Laura Bricker, I'm going to start with you.
So I'm going to censor this a little bit so as not to alienate some of our listeners, because I recently created a big headache for a hotel while I was on February vacation. The place we were staying at was advertising amidst some family attractions, an attraction that I really didn't think was appropriate for families.
You mean letting your kids play with machine guns?
Yeah, Machine Gun America.
It was literally that.
Okay, it was Machine Gun America. It was like in the state 2 weeks after they had a mass school shooting. And I was like, this is pretty insensitive for you people to be advertising this next to Legoland and Disney. Like, are you freaking kidding me?
I'm going to say, Laura, I'm going to take a leap. That's not political. Like, if you think taking your kids to fire a machine gun is a good idea, that's not political. It's okay. You can say that's a bad idea.
Okay, I'll carry on. Well, so anyway, so here's how it all went down. First I saw it in the room and I was like, I was like getting all enraged because I am the queen of outrage. And then I was like, and Ken goes, I'm leaving. I'm out of here. Because I was like, I'm going to the office. I'm not putting up with this. And so I went to the office and I think they could tell I was a little perturbed. So they left me sitting out there for 20 minutes thinking I might leave. But in that time, I chose to tweet at them multiple times to their corporate headquarters. And they came out and said they couldn't help me. And I said, that's okay. I just tweeted at you. And then thankfully, when I left, by the time I left, they had removed all evidence of the brochures from their premises. So that was a success, but that was probably the biggest nightmare I caused because they saw me coming. They're like, oh shit, her again?
Yes.
Like when I was getting,
you were
I had
fighting
been
the
marked.
man at your hotel.
Yes.
Because you don't
Yes.
believe that children, as an attraction, should be firing machine guns? Like actual literal machine guns. It was literal
for
machine guns.
$24.99. The whole family could go.
That's still a good price, though.
It's a very good price.
It's
I mean,
a bargain.
if you want to do it, it's a good price. Toby Ball, what about you? What is the biggest headache you have ever caused for hotel management?
See, I'm always a considerate hotel guest. So I can't really think of anything I did. So the night before my wedding, the story I got was 4 of my friends were sharing a hotel room, and one of them locked himself in the bathroom, and they'd all been, drinking pretty heavily, and they could kind of, he was like ranting and raving about something, and they said they finally got him to open, and he had like emptied the contents of a tube of toothpaste all over the bathroom.
Jesus.
Oh, nice.
Wow.
Nice.
I don't feel personally responsible for that, but that's what I got.
It's not 40 seagulls, but it's still a mess.
Kevin, what about you? What's the worst
it's a
problem
huge mess.
you've ever created for hotel management?
I think it was letting all those birds into Laura's Nana's timeshare. No, actually, when I was in college, we had this, I was a freshman, and the senior class had like this trip at the end of the year where everybody got to go north to this resort. And I'm not going to drop the name of it because I think the governor runs it. But
Waterville Valley?
But the deal was...
I'll drop the name.
They said, look, a room for 4, $50 a night, and we all get to go up and like, oh, this is great. Although, we're all eating ramen noodles, so we all can throw in enough scratch for $50, right? And there were like hot tubs in the bathrooms, and we're hanging out with girls and crap like that. And all of a sudden, like the president of the senior class kind of like walks in her room. She's like, "Hey guys, we made a mistake. It wasn't $50 a person. It's $50 per person."
Oh.
And so we were like, "Well, that sucks." Like, we're not throwing any more money. You told us $50, so we bankrupt the senior class.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, I have a problem that I made for hotel management that Kevin does not know about, and I'm going to confess.
Oh, all right.
For the first time on this podcast, Kevin, I apologize in advance.
Yeah.
Kevin has a thing about hotels where he believes when you go to a hotel, you are a different person and you are going to have the best time ever. Yes? Can you agree?
Maybe. Where's
All
this
right.
going?
So there's this one time Kevin and I went to a hotel. I will not say what occasion it was. I don't want. And it was family members who were listening, where Kevin decides we're going to be super sexy people, and we have. Let's just say that late into the night, the super sexy people thing was a thing that perhaps caused some noise that bothered other people in adjacent rooms.
What?
And what Kevin doesn't know was that the next day when I went to check out of said hotel, I received a note that the person checking us out handed me from hotel management that said, "The neighbor in the room next to you asked us to pass this along. It couldn't have been that good."
That was the note?
That was the note. All right, Laura Bricker.
We're going to talk more about this off the air.
We are.
I don't think I can
You're
top
wrong,
this.
lady. It was that good.
No, it was just Hotel Kevin. It was great, but it was just Hotel Kevin. Laura Bricker, before we end the show, do we have a cat of the week this week?
So, people, you need to send me some cats. I've been getting a lot of other animals, not cats. So we have a dog of the week this week.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Megan Maddox, her dog Darko, was 15 last week, and he had a happy bark day cake.
Happy
and
bark
doggy
day.
ice cream. And she says it's not too shabby for 105 years old in human years.
105?
And she sends nice pictures.
Human year. Not a
He's
not a
got
turtle.
his little birthday hat on, and he's looking at his cake, and he's just like, he doesn't look super thrilled. But, he is old. So happy birthday, Darko.
Seriously, happy birthday, Darko. But did anyone else wonder how that 128-year-old turtle was walking down the stairs?
Very slowly. Next question.
All
He's got
right.
the stair lift thing.
Laura Bricker, if people want to submit other animals besides dogs to you, but I kind of vote for dogs, for Pet of the Week, how do they find you on Twitter?
At Laura Bricker. I also got a chicken in diapers this week, but send me some cats at Laura Bricker.
And Toby Ball, if people want to reach out to you and find out how they can get the Toby Ball Toby Time Book Club podcast, how can they find you online?
At Toby Ball NH.
And Kevin Flynn, people want to reach out to you on Twitter and tell you that it was, in fact, that good. How can they find you online?
They don't know it wasn't that good. I'm at Kevin P. Flynn.
And you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at Reb Lavoie. You can also tweet to our show at Crime Writers On and join the very fine folks on the official
I'm better than adequate.
Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group, or leave a comment on our regular old Facebook page. But seriously, please join the Crime Writers On Facebook discussion group. You can subscribe now to get exclusive content on Patreon at the $5 level. And of course, you can also get great content at StitcherPremium.com/crime, where you can get our exclusive podcast, Married with Podcast. This week, by the way, we tackle a really great question with the subject line, "Should I have sex with my unemployed husband in the middle of the day?" It was a great, great question.
But it's not that good.
It's super good. If you love this show or any of our podcasts, please tell a friend. And if you haven't already, leave a review on iTunes. Our theme song was performed by Rocksteady Freddy and the New York Ska Jazz Ensemble. And this show was recorded in the Yoga Loft above the Bodega in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi studio, formerly known as Studio C, the place where we 100% definitely keep our 100-plus-year-old turtles. On behalf of all the crime writers, thanks so much for listening. We will catch you
later.
Hello?
Hey, there she is.
Hey, Rabia.
Hi.
Rabia.
Sorry, guys.
Rabia, meet Patrick. He is cowed by you. And I told you.
I love Patrick. Actually, I'm so excited. You guys, I feel like I finally joined the cool club. I'm so excited to be talking to this.
That's how I feel. No, I've talked to Rebecca about you every time I get the chance to mention you.
And I was like, you're both going to be at CrimeCon. You're going to meet her. And he's like, no, I'm not. I'm like, yeah, you are.
Can we be best friends?
Totally. I have lots of best friends. Thank you for wanting to be. And
I'm
hi,
dying.
Toby. Toby, you're there too, right?
Yeah, I'm here. How are you?
Rabia, I'm dying to talk to you about your book. I'm obsessed with your book.
That would be a good book club book. Because guess who's never read it? Me.
You.
And I need to do it.
Rebecca Lavoie.
Yeah,
I don't know why, Rebecca's just sick of hearing about all of this. She's like, I've listened to it forever.
You didn't actually give me a copy of your book. You gave me that other book, and I read it in one day.
Well, I just figured you had my book, woman. So I I did not know that you did not, but you should be deeply ashamed of yourself. I will give you a copy.
I hear that I'm even in it, and
It's true.
Wait, do you want to eat? Do you want a Kindle or do you want like a real copy?
Oh, I want the real. Are you fucking kidding me? I want it with a signature.
Oh, okay.
I want it to smell like you're amazing. Like
It's gonna smell like curry and cats. How's
Yes,
that?
For Toby, we're just hijacking his production.
I'm also just as excited to talk to Toby, by the way. Toby has been like a
thorn in your side for 3 years.
Well, no, the Crime Writers On team, Toby is like that enigma for me. He's like, I'm a little bit scared of Toby, I'll be honest. I'm scared of
Yeah, that's probably right.
Partners in Crime Media.
YourMechanic.com sends the mechanic right to your home or office. Better yet, you get a quote up front, and it's the actual price you pay. Car won't start? Check engine light bugging you? Call 1-800-701-6230 today to schedule your appointment, or visit yourmechanic.com/crime. For a limited time, you'll get $20 off your first service. Call now, 800-701-6230.
The friendship is sharing deal. Because I want one of your McNuggets.
And I need some of your Quarter Pounder.
There's a deal for everyone at McDonald's. Get one favorite like 10-piece chicken McNuggets, a Quarter Pounder, or a Big Mac and get another for just $1. Price and participation may vary. Valid for item of equal or lesser value.